Welcome back, all of you, to the valedictory session of our esteemed one-day international conference on the theme, Looking at the Pandemic Through Gender Lens. It gives me an immense pleasure, and it is in fact a moment of pride for all of us, that today we have amongst us a magnificent personality, Dr. 𝗟𝗲𝗿𝗄𝗏, Rapporteur, United Nations Human Rights Council. Ma'am, I welcome you to our esteemed conference. Your benign presence has added more grace to our conference, in fact. It is so motivating for all of us to have you amongst us. I would request Ms. Nandini Katti to share ma'am's dignified profile.
Thank you, Ms. Janvi. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our today's guest for the valedictory function, Dr. 𝗟𝗲𝗿𝗄𝗏. She is an adjunct professor at the University of Sydney. Madam is also an honorary fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. Dr. 𝗟𝗟𝗿𝗄𝗏 holds honorary doctorates of law from the University of Sydney, University of New South Wales, and the University of Technology, and honorary doctorates also from Deakin, Edith Cowan, and the Griffith Universities. Madam has remained Australia's longest serving sex discrimination commissioner from 2007 to 2015. She has worked to break down cultural and social barriers faced by women and men and to promote gender equality. In 2016, Dr. 𝗟𝗟𝗿𝗄𝗏 was appointed as an officer of the Order of Australia and was named 2016 New South Wales Australian of the Year. In 2017, Madam was appointed by the United Nations in Geneva as a special rapporteur and independent expert. Madam founded and convened the Champions of Change strategy, activating influential men to take action on gender equality. She has led 13 major cultural reviews into Australia's leading national institutions, including the Australian Defence Force. She is a board member of the International Service for Human Rights and a member of Global Institute for Women's Leadership Advisory Council at the King's College in London. She is currently Chair Rapporteur of United Nations Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. We are indeed very fortunate to have amongst us a globally acknowledged leader, social innovator, and advocate. Good evening and welcome, Dr. 𝗟𝗟𝗿𝗄𝗏.
Thank you so very much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you for inviting me to take part in your conference today. I was so excited to see the subject matter of your conference and to really contribute in some small way to this important conversation about applying a gender lens to COVID-19, to the crisis. I've been to Mumbai many times. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, I have to say. I once went, probably when I was a very young lawyer, to your beautiful city and spent time there with a number of Indian colleagues on a major piece of litigation. But it is one of my favorite cities in the world, so scenically beautiful, so diverse, incredible food, world-class education, including right here at KES Shroff College of Arts and Commerce, and you know, such warm and welcoming people. So thank you so much for inviting me to come to Mumbai again. I'm coming in a bit of a different format electronically, but it's just wonderful to be with you all. I don't think any of us expected to be living through a time such as this. I know 18 months ago, I would have had no idea about what we've seen today. And it's a time that's caused so much heartbreak for so many, particularly those that have lost loved ones. It's also exposed starkly structural and systemic inequalities in our societies and how those inequalities have been exacerbated through the impact of COVID-19, because it's impacted different people differently, and it's had a particularly adverse impact on women. So that's why I think you shining a light on this critical issue is just so important. And I want to thank you for your determination to continue enriching the lives of your students through the teaching, despite the enormous challenges that face you. And I know I speak for many Australians when I say to you, we send our very best wishes from here in Australia at such a difficult time. Every one of us is anxiously following your news, seeing what's happening in India each day, and hoping that in the very near future, we might once again be able to travel to your beautiful country and that you might also be able to travel to ours. So tonight here today in Mumbai, but I'm joining you from Sydney, Australia. I'm sitting on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They're our traditional lands. And we have an acknowledgement, pretty much in Australia, it's a standard practice where we acknowledge one of the 500 different Aboriginal tribes and the land on which we're sitting. So I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people, to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I also want to start just by acknowledging the tremendous work of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in my country, advocating for equality for so many centuries. As I reflected on what I might say today at this important valedictory ceremony and speech, I thought back to my own time at university, and I just remembered the many individuals who had helped me as I'd gone through my own university journey. And there I'm thinking about the academics, the professionals, the fellow students, so generous with their time, so insightful, but they really helped shape me as an eager new law graduate about 30 years ago. And I still remember following the valedictory speech, and we had a graduation ceremony. I remember striding out the doors of the university, armed with a strong education, feeling invincible. I was ready for anything. I was trepidatious, I was unsure. I didn't know where my path would lead, but I was so excited about the opportunities that might await. And of course, as I was thinking about that today and this morning, I realized that when I graduated 30 years ago, I was actually entering into a more peaceful world, a safer world, a healthier world, and indeed a more certain world than the world that the students that are leaving today are entering into. But that's why I think it's even more important today that each of you who leave this place, you don't know what the future might hold, but like me, you can be sure that with an excellent education and the education you've received here at this, incredible college, armed with that, you will have opportunity. And not just that, but you will have a responsibility to shape, I think, a different world, a world where dignity and safety, compassion, inclusion, equality, and respect absolutely lie at the heart of every one of our nations. And it occurred to me that if we want that world, each of us must live as if this is already that country. Because if enough of us live like that, then that's really the first step on the long road to change. So what I thought I'd do today in the time that I have available is I'll share a little bit with you about the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, because it is a new UN mandate and it doesn't have the same visibility, say, as a CEDAW or treaty body or other treaty bodies. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the status of human rights for women and girls across the world today in 2021. And finally, I thought that given some of you who are on this speech and call, some of you may be leaving the college today. So I thought I'd share just some insights about our most recent global report that the working group did, which really focused squarely on women's rights in the changing world of work. So you're going to step out into the workforce, and I thought it might be interesting for you to hear what's shifting in work today, and what would it look like if we put women's human rights front and center of work. So let me just start with the working group. Our working group, which is one of the official mandates of the UN Human Rights Council. You'll know the Human Rights Council is based in Geneva. A mandate and working group was established in September 2010. And it was really created from the efforts of many. It was created because of the lobbying of member states, including India, but also because of women's human rights defenders and civil society. I mean, every one of those actors recognized that in 2010, despite significant progress, particularly since the Beijing Platform for Action back in 1995, but despite that progress, in 2010, discrimination against women and girls pretty much persisted in every region of the world. And today, our working group, together with the Special Rapporteur on Violence, who you may know, Dubravka, we are the only mandate, so the Special Rapporteur on Violence and the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, we are the only mandates amongst 44 mandates to focus solely on women's human rights. And I always think that's pretty incredible given women represent half the world's population. So in our early work, the working group examined 4 interrelated areas of women's lives. So we looked at women's political and public lives. We looked at their economic and social lives. We looked at family and culture. And then we looked at health and safety. And then when we came together in 2017, we realized that was the beginning of a pushback on women's rights. The world at that time stood at a crossroads, with the very concept of gender equality being contested in more and more countries across the world. So over the next few years, we shifted to really focus on reasserting gender equality and countering the rollbacks that we were seeing in so many different nations of the world. How we operate is in 3 main areas. Firstly, we undertake country visits. Now, you may imagine that in the last 12 to 14 months, it has been impossible to conduct any country visits. So that part of our work has gone on hold over the last 12 months. But prior to that, we've conducted visits to 18 countries around the world. We look at the status of women and girls in those countries, and then we make recommendations to national governments as to initiatives that they could undertake to lift the status of women and girls. So that's the country visits. The second thing we do is we issue official communications to governments. And during the life of a working group, we have issued 400 official communications addressing issues such as marital status and nationality, sexual and reproductive health and rights, women's human rights defenders, domestic workers, access to land, and so many other things. And we're often notified about human violations in different countries by the activists in that country. And then we're able to write to the government, drawing to their attention these particular issues. So that's the second thing we do. And the third thing that we do is we develop global thematic reports to really advance conceptual debates. And over the last few years, we've looked at women deprived of liberty. We're looking at sexual and reproductive health and rights in times of crisis like COVID. And indeed, we've also looked at women's rights in the changing world of work. And maybe the final thing that I should mention here, because I think we have intervened in the Indian Supreme Court, but we have the ability to present amicus briefs to Supreme Courts in different regions of the world. And we do that on a reasonably regular basis. We're looking right at the minute at an amicus brief to Tanzania. So in summary, our work in the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, it contributes to the progressive development of law and policy and protects and advances women's human rights in every country around the globe. The other thing that we're able to do is convene groups of people. We have what's called a convening capacity, and that enables us to open up space for women's human rights defenders at the international level so that they can inform us about human rights violations in their region. And we, whenever we meet, and in fact the working group will be meeting every evening this week, we will have presentations from from civil society organisations and women's human rights defenders. We also work closely with other UN mandates, and you'll be aware of a CEDAW treaty body, the treaty body which administers the Global Women's Rights Convention, called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So we work very closely with the CEDAW treaty body and also with the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. So how does women's rights and gender equality look today in 2021? Well, over the past few decades, there has been significant progress on women's rights. I mean, if you look at political participation across the world, it has doubled since the Beijing Platform for Action back in 1995. And indeed, even last year, if you looked at the number of women running for parliament in Myanmar, for example, there were 1,000 female candidates. And that didn't happen by accident. That was a result of a lot of organising on the ground. And of course, we've seen what's happened in Myanmar since that time. But that was a real shift in that country. In the US, we've seen more female and diverse women appointed to Congress, more than ever before. So political participation is a good story. The second thing that we've seen is technology enabling new forms of political expression and engagement, although, of course, we still have quite a large technological divide. There's less smartphones and digital devices in the hands of women than there are of men, but we've seen some progress there. We've also seen progress in closing the gender gap in education, and particularly primary school education and increasingly secondary school for women. We've seen women's labour force participation increase significantly. And most importantly, we have seen the rights of women and girls to equality within the family. We've seen that guaranteed in most modern legal regimes. So pretty much on all the country visits, the first place that I look to see whether there is gender equality in that country is into the personal laws and to look at the equality within the family. So that's been some progress there. And then finally, there has been progress in certain countries in recognising women's sexual and reproductive rights. And the standout country at the minute is Argentina in South America, who's just introduced some quite progressive law in relation to abortion and women's reproductive rights. So that's all the good news. But in the working group and in our mandate, we also have some deep concerns at the minute. Because as I said, today the world stands at a crossroads in relation to gender equality. I mean, progress towards an equal and just society where women are free from all forms of violence and harassment, it's just been too slow, too uneven, pretty much in every country of the world. And I'd put India in that category, and I'd also put Australia in that category. So it's been slow, glacial in many cases. And what's happening is that marginalised groups of women are remaining left behind, while political conflict, natural disasters, and of course a health crisis like this pandemic, every one of those things are creating new populations of vulnerable women. And I'm sure about some of the issues that you've discussed in your conference today. But not only that, today, the struggle for women's rights, it takes place within a global context of increasing backlash. Anti-gender equality actors across all regions are threatening our hard-fought progress. The common features of that pushback, it's often a focus on curtailing women's human rights, and particularly entrenching stereotypical gender roles, so particular traditional roles for women, and also control over women's bodies. Not only that, these anti-gender equality forces are also restricting spaces for the work of women's human rights defenders, and we're seeing a shrinking of civil society space in many countries of the world. The COVID pandemic is exacerbating this inequality and economic insecurity, particularly for the most vulnerable women. And government responses, by and large, across the world are quite inadequate. Because what we're seeing because of COVID is an absolute increase, a dramatic increase in women's caregiving responsibilities. I mean, everyone's locked down into the family. Often the schools are closed, childcare's closed, our elderly relatives need more care. So that care is falling disproportionately on women. I mean, even here in Australia, prior to the pandemic, women did about 3 times the unpaid care work of men. That's in Australia. And during the COVID pandemic, that has doubled again. Not only caregiving, but we're seeing a rise in what was already an epidemic of sexual and domestic violence. And once again, that's a part often of everyone being locked down in the house. And of course, the economic strains and other strains. But in some countries of the world, the increase in domestic and family violence is in the order of 300%. We're seeing during COVID the continued feminization of poverty, the proliferation of barriers to healthcare. And let's remember that 80% of the frontline healthcare workers across the world are women. But we're seeing barriers to accessing healthcare and also particularly pregnancy-related healthcare. I can't tell you how many countries across the world have designated reproductive healthcare as an elective, and discretionary procedure. And therefore, there is no access to that type of healthcare in many countries of the world, including the United States in a number of their states. So each of these issues is profoundly jeopardizing women's safety and well-being. It's jeopardizing their economic security and also their participation in political and public life. But I suppose the good news is that we have the opportunity to build back better in the next phase. But if we are to do that, we do need to redress the structural inequalities that have always held women back. And we have to start to reimagine a different world, a world where women's human rights, which are fundamental rights, are not subordinated to cultural, religious, or political considerations. So it's at the minute with the pandemic, it's an extraordinarily challenging context. And it's a time for every one of us to stand up more intentionally to reassert the human rights of women so that every woman and girl in all our countries, in all her diversity, can live a life of dignity and respect. And with this in mind, last year, and remembering that some of the students will be leaving to enter into work, hopefully paid work. So last year, my working group presented our global thematic report on women's rights in the changing world of work. We presented it to the 44th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And in that report, we analysed the gendered dimensions of major trends that were changing the world of work. And those trends were technological change, and we've seen accelerated digitisation because of the pandemic. So we looked at technological and demographic change. We looked at accelerated globalisation, particularly global supply chains. And we also looked at the shift to sustainable economies. And what we emphasised in that report is we have to focus on structural and systemic discrimination, which is really faced by most women in all facets of their life. So what we tried to do in the report was to set out a vision for a world of work that starts with women's human rights, that transforms the current economic model through the redistribution of power and resources, and that recognises that a world of work that realises women's human rights is not just a world of work that works for women, but everyone will benefit when you put women's rights front and centre of the world of work. So if we looked at how we did that, the fact is for most women across the world today, and I put Australia absolutely in this category, systemic discrimination is a lived everyday reality. I mean, if I look, and I'd say this is the same in India as well, we've got an unwavering gender pay gap, women being paid less than men for work of comparable or equal value. We've got the concentration of women in the most vulnerable forms of work, and I know in India, particularly in the informal economy. We've got women's pervasive experience of sexual harassment and violence within the workplace, as well, of course, catching public transport and other things to work. And then we have the disproportionate share of unpaid care and domestic work that women are carrying. And as I said before, this is only intensifying because of COVID. Now, there's been many reports, including from the ILO and others, looking at how these trends are affecting work, but there are very few which actually do this through some kind of gender lens. And so that's what we tried to do. Just like you're doing through the pandemic, we applied a gender lens to the world of work. And I'll tell you what we found. So we looked at the technological advances in the world of work, and we said, look, that's a mixed picture for women. It can create opportunities, but also challenges. I mean, one of the opportunities, and as we've seen during the pandemic, is the technology has facilitated much more flexible work arrangements, which will better enable women to balance paid work with unpaid care work. So that's a positive, although of course that doesn't extend to all workers, particularly essential workers who need to be on the ground. But technology has provided increased access to distance learning, and I'd say that your college has actually taken advantage of these technologies through the pandemic. So access to distance learning, information networks, and it's enabled women to collectively organise and strengthen their political voice. So that's on the one hand a real positive. But the challenges, and on the other hand, is that there's a risk that the growth of digital platforms, and particularly the gig economy, will likely contribute to heightening women's economic inequality by increasing the informalisation of women's work due to gaps in existing labour regulations and a lack of access to social protection. And that's absolutely the case down here in Australia as well. And the gig economy may also deepen structural discrimination by reinforcing gender stereotypes and the expectation that it's women that will undertake insecure forms of informal paid work, and they'll do that within the confines of their home. So it's almost like substituting the traditional sweatshop for a digital sweatshop where women once again become piece workers or freelancers from their home. So that's technological change. If I look at demographic change, I mean, in many countries of the world, populations are aging, and with aging comes women's increased care responsibility and increased demand for domestic and care workers, including migrant workers. And what we point out in our report is that unless paid care work is properly valued with significant investments in decent work conditions, there's a danger that will further entrench the gender pay gap and structural discrimination against women. And that's particularly compounded in the case of migrant domestic and care workers who, as you will know, as well as I do, they often experience multiple forms of discrimination based on their legal status, their gender, ethnicity, race, class, or caste identity. So that's the aging. But in other parts of the world, and I'm thinking here some of the African countries and also in the Pacific, what we're seeing is a youth bulge, increase in the youth population. And in this respect, women and girls increasing educational attainment is a significant opportunity to increase young women's access to work and to power. But our consultations with women's human rights defenders and governments in those two regions of the world, we found that there is a risk there that with systematic and patriarchally rooted denial of reproductive autonomy, lack of access to sexual and reproductive health services, along with harmful and discriminatory practices such as child marriage, those things, if they're allowed to continue unabated, will hamper young women's access to education and employment. And in some areas in the Pacific, the lack of access just to basic kind of infrastructure like women's toilets, girls' separate toilets to boys, have the impact of driving young women out of education, particularly when they reach puberty. So now turning to accelerated globalization, women are employed in global supply chains, and that employment is often insecure with poor working conditions and labour and human rights violations. We're seeing a fissuring of the workplace through increased global supply chains, subcontracting, the use of zero contract hours, and the use of flexible forms of labour. And that's creating significant challenges also for collective organising through trade unions and cooperatives. And finally, I just want to mention the shift to sustainable economies, or what we call just transitions. That shift does hold potential opportunities for women's employment. And we spent quite a deal of time focusing on that in our report. Because the available data indicated that women are more likely to work in the renewable energy sector in most countries across the world as compared to employment in fossil fuel sectors. But we risk entrenching the same inequality that was seen in fossil fuels through gender segregation if we don't take some intentional action in these new high-growth sectors like renewable energy. In developing countries and a range of countries, women are already concentrated in informal work in waste collection and recycling. But as you well know, workers in those industries are highly stigmatised and they suffer from harassment, poor wages and conditions. So the increasing formalisation of waste collection and recycling is placing women workers at risk, particularly if there are no available upskilling opportunities. And we saw the new technology of burning and different types of things, incineration particularly, actually that was eliminating work for women where there were no upskilling opportunities or strategies for waste pickers within formalised systems. So our overarching conclusion was that there is a significant risk that the future of work will deepen existing inequality without some intentional action as we recover from COVID-19. And we looked at the areas where we needed intentional action, and we targeted 5 areas. And I just want to quickly run through those areas for you. There are 5 areas which need to be addressed. The first one is ensuring women's, in fact, all workers' freedom from violence and harassment. And for example, that was about prioritising prevention and survivor-centred responses to sexual harassment, particularly in new forms of work such as the gig economy, because there's very little protection for sexual harassment in the gig economy. So that was the first thing. The second thing is we have to recognise and reduce and redistribute unpaid care work between men and women, and also domestic work. The third thing we need to do is disrupt patterns of women's and men's work. There's so much occupational segregation. These jobs are for men and these jobs are for women, and the ones for women are paid less than the ones for men. So we have to disrupt that pattern We have to disrupt the value and the roles. And for example, adopting temporary special measures for high growth areas such as renewables would be one suggestion there. And then fourthly, we need to ensure that all women workers can enjoy their rights without discrimination, and that includes informal workers, because we know women are largely employed in the informal economy across the world. So, for example, by providing informal workers access to social protection. And then the final area we targeted is we need to support women's collective action and organising. So when we reimagine the structure of work and the economy, there needs to be a fundamental transformation, because as you well know, current models, particularly economic models, our economy, your economy, pretty much every other economy across the world, those economies are built on women's unpaid care and domestic work. Such work sustains entire economies, yet it remains undervalued and it remains invisible. And not only that, it depletes women's time and economic security. And there are policy alternatives. These alternatives require reimagining the economy, redistributing power and resources, generating decent work, and placing a value on the well-being of people. So care for people and care for the planet. And I'm really pleased to note that in our report, we were able to outline and identify a number of governments that are moving in this direction by prioritising human well-being and care in their economic policies. But to change this picture will require urgent attention from all of us. And it'll also require us to ensure that we don't miss the opportunity to build back better as we create an economic recovery from COVID, an economic recovery which places women's human rights at the centre and therefore benefits all. So in finalising my remarks today, I really want to speak to those students who are leaving this great college today. Because firstly, I want to congratulate you on your profound achievements, on your dedication and commitment to learning that's really brought you to this place. You do leave today with great knowledge and skills, and I hope that you've met many dear friends during your time at the college. But as I think about it, those things are the easy part. You will have access to great opportunities, but those opportunities I've found can bring challenges, both personal challenges and also professional. And in those moments, you'll be called upon to stand up, to make some hard decisions and sometimes some unpopular ones. To do so, you'll need judgment, which I'm sure self-awareness, experience and humility have taught you. But it occurs to me that just like the women and men I meet every day in my work as I travel across the world, working with people who want to create change, they want to create a more gender equal world, what we often talk about is courage. You'll need courage, deep moral courage. And you can't learn courage. Courage you must find. So good luck to every one of you who's leaving today. Good luck in creating an India that you must be so proud of, an India that you'll be proud to hand down to your grandchildren. I hope that once again our paths will cross, and I'm hoping they'll cross in a physical sense, not just an electronic sense. So it's been a great honour that you've bestowed on me today to invite me to be part of your celebrations and your one-day international conference. As you start your new chapter in life, I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Dr. Elizabeth Broderick. This is Principal Dr. Lily Bhushan from Shroff College, Mumbai. Thanks a lot for the wonderful exposition which you have given on gender issues, the suggestions, the areas of improvement, and the age-long discrimination which women have been facing around. Madam, my PhD was in women's studies and 30 years back, and I think I don't find much change so far as discrimination at work is concerned, discrimination at home, discrimination in society. So women really have to upskill themselves and should have knowledge of their own rights and should be able to fight for their own rights. Thank you so much, madam. Wonderful exposition of your thoughts. Over to you, Janvi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, ma'am. I'm sure all of us are so encouraged by hearing your words. Thank you for giving us an unforeseen glimpse of the current situation on gender issues and inequalities from various angles across the globe and what can be done to make it better. And I assure you, ma'am, that all of us who are witnessing this conference will surely harmonize our efforts in the same direction. Now, to share with us the formal report of today's conference, I invite Assistant Professor Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Thank you, Janvi. Today's one-day international conference looking at the pandemic through gender lens was organized by the Women Development and Empowerment Cell in collaboration with Mahila, 𝗟𝗢𝗢𝗐 Vikas Mahamandal, Government of Maharashtra, and Beti Bachao, Department of Students Development, Shivaji University, Kolhapur. The conference saw over 1,600 registered delegates, out of which 93 people presented their research papers. The conference was live streamed on YouTube, where it would be available for later viewing. The conference started at 10 o'clock with a prayer to Goddess Saraswati, a Hindu goddess of knowledge. The inaugural session was flagged off by Ms. Janvi Joshi, who also anchored the event. The principal of 𝗂𝗄𝗃 College, Dr. Lily Bhushan, welcomed the dignitaries and resource people a concept note. 𝗍𝗔, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Shivaji University, Kolhapur, delivered an inaugural session social work of Mahila Arthik Vikas Mahamandal, to which she currently serves as a chairperson. Dr. Pam Rajput, Professor Emerita and Founder Director of Center for Women's Studies and Development at Punjab University, delivered a keynote address which was a disquisition on the gender response to COVID-19 given by India as a nation. Ms. Kamla Bhasin, founder of Sangat, a feminist network, was a guest of honor who presented in absentia the work done by her NGO during COVID. The inaugural session ended with the vote of thanks delivered by Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Desai, Associate Professor at Shivaji University. The plenary session, which soon followed, saw a panel discussion by Dr. Sangeeta Desai, who is a faculty at SNDT University, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, an economist and women's rights activist, Dr. Chitra Sinha, who is a co-founder of 𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗏𝗏 Consultancy, and Dr. Miriam Sidhat Khan, who is a professor at University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. This discussion was about the impact of COVID on gender norms, women at workplace, legal framework, and women's health. This panel discussion was moderated by Professor Roxana Marinescu, who is a faculty at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies at Romania. Post-lunch, the conference was divided into 5 parallel paper presentation sessions moderated by Dr. Sangeeta Desai, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, Dr. Chitra Sinha, Dr. Miriam Sidhat Khan, and Dr. Arvind Hardhankar, respectively. Each session had its own related to women and COVID-19. Total 93 papers were presented here, which studied from the lens of pandemic various issues like law, gender, women's issues at workplace, at home, in sports, and as frontline workers. The papers had come from various countries like Philippines, Kuwait, Sierra Leone, Romania, South Africa, Canada, and of course, India. After the paper presentation session, Broderick, a rapporteur at United Nations Human Rights Council, delivered a valedictory address and enlightened the audience about the work of UN for the rights of women. And that has been the happening till this point. I'm very sure you are eagerly waiting to hear the results of Best Research Paper Award. And for that, back to you, Janvi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshit sir. Now the time has come for which all the paper presenters have been eagerly waiting, the time for result declaration. And to do the honors, I invite Dr. Vibhuti Patel.
So good evening, friends. First of all, I would like to greet Professor Elizabeth Broderick. I was a member of a working group just 2 years back. We visited Australia and I made a presentation. I was given opportunity to make presentation on women's collective action in organizing in Asia. So it really makes me so happy that you are here, and I've also attended the working group dissemination meeting last July. Dr. Lily Bhushan, Dr. Roxana, who has been here since morning, and all the teachers and dignitaries from all over India and abroad. There are so many senior teachers, HODs of various disciplines, women's studies centers, teachers, scholars, and students are here. And this is a way, I would like to say that I was in track 2, which focused more on women in the world of work. And all the 21 papers, all of them were very good, insightful. At least 6 or 7 papers were based on primary research, and I'm sure in all other tracks also, they must be there. In the midst of lockdown and the compulsion of physical distancing, body distancing, they conducted interviews either on WhatsApp video or on phone, and sometimes where there were relaxation in lockdown, they personally met. And based on that, I congratulate all 93 because I have been associated with this endeavor with Vaishali Madam, right, for last 3 months when we were deciding the topics, Sangeeta Desai, myself, and Vaishali Madam. So one can say that the quality of papers was very, very good, all of them, and I congratulate all the paper writers. But I don't like to announce the best paper. I don't believe in competition. I believe in cooperation. But this is the norm in the university culture. So first in track 1, Manjusha Patwardhan from Bhavans at Somani College, Mumbai. She gets the best paper award, and her paper is titled as Gender Dimension of COVID-19, Impact of Pandemic on Gender Roles. And second paper, there were 2 best papers. So the judge has said that. Second one is by Diya Katriani, Medha Nandini, and Vaishnavi Singh from Miranda House, Delhi University, and that is the second best paper. And remaining, the title of the paper is Reimagining Girls' Education During COVID-19. Both of them are extremely important concern. In the track 2, the best paper award goes to Taushif Fatima, Center for Women's Studies, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, and Mridula Chauhan from MJP Rohilkhand University, Bareilly. And their paper is on very, very difficult subject, COVID-19 and the lived reality of women migrant workers. Migrant workers had been invisible in the discourse on migration, in spite of so many photographs and videos were there about how women of all ages walked for miles together to reach their destination at the time of reverse migration. Congratulations, Fatima and Mridula. In the third track, the best paper award goes to Anjuman Yadav from Miranda House, University of Delhi, and Ruchita Yadav, Dr. Ram Mohan Lohia, National Law University, Lucknow. And the title of the paper is Women's Society and Law in COVID-19 Pandemic, Reforms Need Re-Form. Okay, so very, very important there. In the fourth track, So the third track was on legal aspect. First track was on gender norms, second one on work, third one on legal perspective. The fourth one is on health, and in that track, the best paper award goes to 𝗥𝗲𝗀𝗵 Thakur College of Engineering and Technology, Mumbai, 𝗂𝗲𝗀𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗄 Shroff College of Women, Women at Workplace Research Roundup with Aspire of her, HER. And Akash Devangan, Delhi University. The title of his paper is Fate of Structural Flawed, Exploring COVID-19 Pandemic Through a Gendered Lens Case Study of South African Society. Thank you very much. Congratulations to all winners, and also congratulations to all paper presenters.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for doing the honors. All the conference participants are requested to fill in the feedback form. The link is present on both the platforms, the YouTube chat box and the Zoom session chat box. I now request conference convener, Assistant Professor Ms. Vaishali Ojha, to present the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Janvi. On behalf of entire KES family, I take the privilege to thank everyone whose contribution and efforts have made this one-day international conference a phenomenal success. I place on record our deep sense of gratitude to Honorable Shri D.T. Shedke, Vice Chancellor, Shivaji University, for showing faith in Women Development and Empowerment Cell of KES Shroff College. We are really thankful to you, sir. Honorable Srimati Jyoti Thakre, I owe a huge debt of gratitude, not only for your gracious presence and enlightening speech, but for the constant support to make this conference a memorable one. Your presence has added grandeur to today's function. Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Pam Rajput, Ms. Kamla Basin, women whose voices are heard when it comes to local, national, and international policy and program making in development, in peace and security, in the promotion and protection of human rights. I am eternally grateful to you all accepting our invitation and giving your precious time. I'm sure your presentation will add depth to the content and deliberation. Thank you for joining us. My thanks to all the panelists from all over the world. Dr. Vibhuti Patel from India, Dr. Roxana from Romania, Dr. Chitra Sinha from Bahrain, Dr. Mariam Siddat Khan from South Africa, Dr. Sangeeta from India, who invested their precious time in the conference. Thank you very much for putting me up with my constant emailing. I cannot promise, ma'am, that I will not bother you, because we will need your constant support and supervision for the future endeavor as well. My special and most heartfelt thanks to Dr. Vibhuti and Dr. Sangeeta Desai, and none other than Ms. Roxana for mentoring and guiding me through this journey. Special shout out to Dr. Vanita Saibani, Chairperson, WDEC, who came to my rescue to manage various crises in the entire organization process. I request all of you to put your hands together for the super energetic WDEC team, Ms. Aarti Gadre, Ms. Jayashree Lokhande, Mr. Rajkumar Gupta, and Ms. Samita Sen Gupta. Special mention to Ms. Aarti Gadre and Dr. Pratibha Desai, who stood by me through this endeavor. An event of this magnitude requires meticulous planning and execution and an eye for details. I am extremely fortunate to be able to draw upon the willing support of our principal, Dr. Lily Bhushan, Vice Principal, Dr. V.S. Kannan, the KES management, and my dear colleagues, Ms. Janvi Joshi, Ms. Nandini Katti, Dr. Harshad Pore, Ms. Mary Pillai, Mr. Arvind Herikar, Ms. Madhula. For IT and media support, Mr. Devang Thakkar, Mrunali Sawant, Mr. Devang Rajgor, and Rashi, who have demonstrated initiative and involvement at every step and made the task easier. My deep sense of appreciation for student coordinators, Dolu, Ronak, Krish, Dhruv, for being active and enthusiastic throughout the organization process. It is unfortunate that I cannot thank everyone by name, but I must place on record appreciation of the untiring efforts by the WDC team, colleagues, and team of Shivaji University. Special mention to participants. Without you, the event wouldn't have been possible. The highlight of our event is that we drew the attention of participants and support of delegates from all over the world. This event will always remain a memorable one. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this occasion. Thank you all very much indeed. And we bid goodbye with our traditional song, Vande Mataram. Over to you, sir.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Shasya Shamalam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Pulakitayamini, Pullakusumita Drumadala Shobhini, Suhasini, Sumadhura Bhashini, Sukhadam Varadam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
Thank you. And congratulations. Yeah, your teamwork really showed. All of you stood by each other and everything went so smoothly and very, very harmoniously. So it shows, Dr. Lily Bhushan, your whole team is like a one big family. And there is so much of coordination and care and concern and harmony. And I know we, even at 1 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock, I saw Vaishali ma'am working and asking a question. Excellent. Very well. So praiseworthy. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be part of your session today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth ma'am.
Yeah.
See you. Bye.
Yeah, Professor Elizabeth is also equally
Thanks,
efficient
Shirley.
and human. Yeah, okay. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, good. To reconnect.
All good things come to an end, and our memorable conference comes to an end too.
Yeah.
But I'm sure our
Bye, Roxana.
journey.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Excellent.
Ma'am, you are not audible. Principal ma'am, you are not audible.
Yeah, you are. She's muted.
No.
No, ma'am, still not audible.
No, ma'am.
Something wrong.
Ma'am, there is disturbance.
Till we meet again.
Ma'am, we can't hear you clearly.
I think
Ma'am, you just need to switch on one of your devices. See, going.
I would just say that words are not Janvi,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you so much, everybody.
Principal ma'am, I think you are. Ma'am, I think you are logged into 2 devices, so one needs to be mute. Then I think the problem is resolved.
It's okay, you can sign off.
Done, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am, we were
Ma'am,
waiting.
your
You were
voice
waiting for that.
is audible now.
Yes, now it is audible, ma'am.
I was just saying words are not enough to thank you all. Goodbye till we meet again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Roxana ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So with your due permission, shall we end the session, Principal ma'am?
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Just end the meeting now.
Yes.